Tourism has become one of the largest, fastest-growing economic sectors in the world. It can provide a large source of financial resources for countries that are both developed and developing, being one of the main income sources for many developing countries. Tourism is a key driver in socioeconomic progress, helping with job creation and enterprises, export revenues, and infrastructure development. Worldwide, tourism represents 1 out of 11 jobs, 9% of GDP, and 6% of the world's exports.
However, the impacts of tourism are not always positive. Mass tourism is characterized by destinations that frequently experience a mass influx of tourists. This form of tourism has the ability to destroy local cultures, environments, and deplete their accompanying natural resources. Overconsumption and pollution are two of the most significant negative impacts of mass tourism.
In the 1980s, a global environmental agenda sparked the need to address widespread impacts of mass tourism, calling for alternative, more sustainable forms of travel and tourism.
Free market operations of mass tourism do not support the long-term sustainability of common pool resources. Common pool resources are characterized as goods that are non-excludable and rivalrous. Since individual costs of using a resource are always less than the social costs, more common pool resources will be consumed than socially optimal. This situation is referred to as the tragedy of the commons. Many of the physical features on which tourism depends can be characterized as common pool resources such as beaches, mountains, etc. In a free market, it is nearly impossible to halt or rehabilitate the negative impacts of mass tourism where resources are exploited and degraded, economic well-being declines, environmental conditions worsen, and social injustice in tourism dissatisfaction grows.
In terms of undisturbed natural habitats and resources, developing nations tend to have a substantial competitive advantage over developed nations. Tourism growth has been strongest for emerging destinations, bringing in around 50% of international arrivals worldwide. This is unfortunate because they tend to lack the necessary infrastructure to establish a profitable system for tourism. Along with lacking infrastructure, poor nations also lack the regulatory means to protect their local environments from degradation, and many times the very resources bringing in tourists. Leakage is another problem incurred by many developing nations and island economies. As much as 80% of tourism revenue acquired by a host country leaks out of their economy and back into the hands of developed nations providing products and services in those countries. Most tourists live in developed nations, 80% coming only from 20 countries. These travelers are generally accustomed to plentiful resources and aren't always aware of how limited these resources are in developing countries. Tourist uses of developing countries' resources and similar consumptive patterns as their developed counterparts result in the overexploitation and depletion of a developing country's limited resources. Tourism's excessive use of water can lead to regional shortages, which leaves locals struggling to find clean water just to meet their basic needs. The mass influx of travelers leads to overvisitation, and ultimately, the degradation or possibly even the destruction of famous sites and fragile ecosystems. The travel and tourism industry is responsible for about 5% of yearly greenhouse gas emissions. The impact of climate change, spurred on by these emissions, has already damaged some of the most pristine and beautiful tourist destinations and ecosystems in the world.
Sustainable tourism is a process and a goal of sustainable development that will meet the needs of the present without compromising the needs of future generations. Sustainable tourism has emerged as a dominant paradigm of tourism development. Sustainable tourism plays a distinct role in providing a direct financial incentive for the preservation of relatively undisturbed natural habitats that would otherwise be exposed to exploitative and profitable activities, helping to combat the devastating effects of tragedy of the commons. It aids to create a sustainable strategy that addresses the complex interrelationships and linkages that exist between a nation's social, economic, and natural environments that is crucial to the longevity of tourism. New Zealand has been deemed a leader in sustainable tourism movement. 100% Pure New Zealand was a campaign launched in 1999 by Tourism New Zealand, which has become one of the most enduring tourism brands globally. Similar to a developing nation, this island economy relies heavily on exports and imports of capital goods, raw materials, and energy. And without a sustainable strategy for tourism, this nation could fall prey to the degradation generated by unrestrained mass tourism. Since sustainable tourism is a relatively new concept, there is still no dominant consensus on the proper constitution of sustainability in relation to tourism. Higher tourism levels usually involve large hotels which consume significantly large amounts of electricity and water at unsustainable rates. Along with higher water and energy consumption, large hotels can produce significant carbon emissions as well, and continued degradation of local resources through unregulated consumption and pollution. Each one of these issues raises concern with stakeholders who aim to promote sustainable tourism. However, each factor doesn't exist exclusively. They each represent an obstacle to promoting sustainable tourism, and each one requires its own plan of action to be dealt with.
Seeking to draw conclusions about the future with regard to sustainable tourism and development involves making complex assumptions about the patterns of growth and consumption. Research suggests that bottom-up grassroots involvement in sustainable tourism strategy offers more solutions and ideas, creating greater buy-in, increased expertise, energy, enthusiasm, and a sense of accountability and responsibility. What we can conclude is, without proper sustainable planning and care, the impacts of tourism could destroy everything it seeks to embody.